We begin the discussion now with experts from around the world. On Wednesday, more than 17 million voters went to the polls in South Korea's 21st general election. And that's on top of another 12 million who voted early last week. The turnout of 66.2% was the highest for a general election in South Korea in nearly 30 years, and that's despite the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Now, the election came under global attention as it was the first major poll to be conducted amid the COVID-19 crisis. Today, we discuss the significance of this election and what it means for South Korean democracy from a global perspective. For this, we connect with Dr. David Tizzard, Assistant Professor of Politics at Seoul University, and Dr. Ramon Pacheco-Pardo, Reader of International Relations at King's College London and Chair of the Korea Foundation at Vrije University in Brussels. Now, my first question to you, Dr. Tizzard. International media outlets, they've noted how South Korea is the first country in the world to hold a major election since this pandemic blew up. Do you think this was the right decision? And could it perhaps now be an example to countries like the US, which have their own elections coming up this year?
Most definitely. I think we've seen this as being the first election in the time of Corona, as many people have labelled it. And what it's shown ultimately is that public health and democracy can coexist at the same time. In the region, we've seen countries such as Thailand, Cambodia, you've seen strongmen leaders there perhaps push through procedures that reduce democracy. We've seen France talk about cancelling or postponing elections. Here in South Korea, perhaps because it's a post-authoritarian democracy, people here were not willing to give up that right to vote. And so the government wanted these elections to go ahead. The public, the citizens wanted these elections to go ahead. And that was demonstrated by the biggest turnout since 1992. And it was, I believe, the right decision. And just as South Korea has been able to project its testing and its healthcare to other nations around the world, now it might be able to do the same with its democratic model.
Right, so you're seeing a strong sense of civic duty among the South Korean citizens. Well, what about you, Dr. Pacheco-Pardo, observing this from the UK? Well, the turnout here in South Korea was the highest since 1992, and that's, again, despite the spread of COVID-19. So what do you think this actually says about the level of South Korea's engagement in democracy and civic participation?
Well, I think the South Korean citizens have sent a couple of messages. The first message is that they are not afraid of the virus because they think that the government has dealt with it in the correct way. So they are willing to take what some people would see as a risk to go and vote, right, with millions of other people. So I think that's a very positive message that we can slowly go back to normal life in spite of the coronavirus. And I think the second message, and I agreed with what Professor Tizzard was saying before, is the message that South Koreans are not willing to backtrack on the democratic gains taking place since 1987, 1988, that they want to vote, that they want to be able to elect their political leaders, also hold them accountable, of course. So I think that's a very positive message as well. I do agree that this sends a very positive image of South Korea to the rest of Asia, but also to the rest of the world.
So we did manage to have very strong containment measures of COVID-19 at the polling stations. And well, Dr. Pacheco-Pardo, it was a massive win for the ruling Democratic Party, and it can largely be seen as a vote of confidence for the Moon administration. What issues do you think that the majority of the South Korean public were actually backing or really voting for?
I think there were two major issues. The first one, of course, the response to the coronavirus. I mean, that's a major issue across the world. We are seeing some politicians who are being criticized for their response. We're seeing this here in Europe. Some people are being critical of President Trump in the US, but other politicians, including President Moon, are receiving greater support from the voters in their own country, right? And if you look at polls, this is happening across Taiwan as well. It seems in Singapore as well. So in Germany too. So in some countries, this is taking place. I think the second message is that they want the Democratic Party to pursue their agenda. This includes economic reform, this includes strengthening the welfare system, and these are issues that it seems the voters of South Korea want to support. Otherwise, the majority probably would have been a little bit smaller than it was in the end.
So you believe the South Korean public, they want more social welfare policies, they want more economic measures as well, especially with this COVID-19 crisis paralysing much of the economy. Well, Dr. Tizzard, electoral reform measures here in South Korea, they were passed at the end of last year and were in effect on Wednesday. And they were designed to improve the chances of proportional representation seats being awarded to more minor political parties. Well, do you think they've been working so far? Do you think the system has been working so far?
No, absolutely not. I think it's had the exact opposite effect of what was intended. I think these minor parties have, in a sense, been hoisted by their own petard. They made a move for the Democratic Party to put through this reform in mid-December last year. And that reform was fast-tracked through along with lowering the voting age from 19 to 18. In theory, it was going to allow greater proportional representation. It was going to allow a greater arrival of different parties. And we saw many spur up. We saw the Women's Party, the North Korean Defectors Party. What happened in actuality, however, was the immediate creation of satellite parties. And in a sense, I think this has been a really bad decision. So I think they need to go back and work out how they can increase representation. What is the best way to get democratic representation in the National Assembly for the broader South Korean demographic? Because that's really important going forward. And I don't think this last measure has worked as it was intended.
And Dr. Pacheco-Pardo, well, South Korea's political system, it has been fiercely bipartisan for as long as we can really remember. Do you think this will really change anytime soon, or will we continue seeing more of the same?
I don't expect major changes in the long run. I think in the short term, both the Democratic Party and United Future Party, they agree that a new bailout package for the economy is needed. I think they will press for more stimulus, maybe to help small and medium-sized enterprises, to create more jobs in the short term as a response to the coronavirus. But I think that in the long run, we're seeing more partisanship everywhere. In South Korea, we see it in the rest of for example, in Taiwan, we see it in Europe, definitely in the US, and I think this trend is not going to change. What I do think, though, is that the conservatives are going to have to look at why they have suffered this major defeat, and probably are going to have to tune their message to changing dynamics in South Korean society. For example, the role of women in society. The conservatives don't have a compelling message to women in South Korea. So I think they will have to change their message, but I don't think partisanship per se will change dramatically in the coming years.
Well, we had a few bumps there in the connection, but as you were saying, hopefully we will see more agendas and more political parties come out in the future, but right now that might not necessarily be the case. Well, Dr. Tizzard, the number one priority for South Korea's National Assembly now is overcoming this COVID-19 pandemic. And extraordinary parliamentary sessions, they're beginning on Thursday, the day after the election, or they're set to begin anyway. The ruling Democratic Party has been pushing to pass another emergency supplementary budget bill by the end of April, and it plans to start distributing basic income to citizens in May. How realistic do you think this timeline looks now?
Well, I think a more important question is, are these measures going to work? I think we can all agree that the ruling Democratic Party has been very effective in showing itself to be visible, proactive, and there for the citizens. It's also put experts in charge. I believe it's learned lessons from what was perhaps considered a bungled response to the Seoul tragedy, which happened 6 years ago today. Now, Dr. Pacheco-Pardo earlier said that this was a win for South Korea's response to the COVID-19 situation and the economic policies put forward by the current administration. I'm not sure, but I might respectfully disagree with that, because before this election, there was a lot of discontent and there was a lot of unhappiness. Wealth inequality has risen here, and we're unsure whether these policies are the right thing. So we've also seen that fast track system of bills being pushed through also not being effective. So what I might consider is that rather than fast track through UBI policies or these wealth policies, why not put it to the public? Why not issue greater polls, referendums, allow the citizens to increase their civic duty and have their say on what they believe might be effective and appropriate economic packages that they all agree with?
What do you think about this, Dr. Pacheco-Pardo? Do you think he's right? Do you think UBI should be distributed in Korea?
I think it will be distributed. Yes, it is certainly true that we don't know what the effects are going to be. Among other things, because there is going to be a huge economic crisis in major export markets for South Korean products, right? This is happening in the US, it's going to happen in Europe. Japan is also going to go through a major crisis. So we won't know the effects. This is why I think that the package is going to include strong measures to create jobs. South Korea has a very low percentage of public sector jobs if you compare with other OECD countries. So I think these type of measures are going to be passed. As to whether the public should have a say, I think we all agree that it would be better to have buy-in from the public, right, on measures being taken by government. I don't see that happening in South Korea anytime soon, to be honest. Among other things, because I'm not sure that people want to be voting on a regular basis, not only South Korea, but in other countries, about issues that they might not understand. But when it comes to passing a package in the short run, I think this is going to happen. I think the public in general is going to support it because it will improve economic conditions. And I also think that the opposition party will support it as well, because it's very difficult to argue against economic measures when South Korea is going to probably suffer an economic recession.
Well, just before we go, this question goes to both of you, but Dr. Tizzard, then what do you hope to see from the 21st National Assembly in the face of this pandemic? And there's a global recession that many are saying is actually happening. It's expected to stretch out for months and months. What do you hope that lawmakers here will do?
I hope the lawmakers will continue working for the public, as that is their job. They shouldn't just become elected, serve a 4-year term, and then work for their own elections. They should be focused on the people's lives, the people's health, the people's safety. Moreover, however, they are becoming a beacon for the rest of the world. Edward Said wrote in 1978 the book of Orientalism. What we're seeing in this COVID-19 outbreak is that these models are being overturned. Now South Korea can be an example of democracy, an example of public health for the rest of the world. And so I hope these National Assembly people that have been elected serve the citizens, but also serve as an example for the rest of the world how public health and democracy can coexist. Dr.
Pacheco-Pardo, just before we go.
I think there are a couple of issues here. I mean, the first issue is that according to the IMF, South Korea is going to suffer a recession, but this is actually going to be smaller than recessions in other developed economies. So I think this means that other countries might also look at the South Korean economic model to see how they can preserve some sort of economic growth, or at least the recession not being as big as predicted in other places, plus also the creation of jobs, because unemployment in Korea is not going up by as much as in Europe or the US. And the second issue, I think that we're going to need more international cooperation in the G20, probably in the WTO as well, in the IMF, and probably we're going to try to get the opinion of South Korea, other Asian countries that are weathering the crisis, on how to escape the worst of the recession that seems very likely to be coming.
See, so hopefully we'll, well, now the votes have been cast in, it looks like we have a large majority for the ruling party. We'll have to wait and see how they do. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, but it's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. David Tizzard in Seoul and Dr. Ramon Pacheco-Pardo in London.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is also where we wrap up the show today. Thank you very much for watching, and join us again at the same time tomorrow for more global insights. Have a great day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.